The morning sun cast long shadows across Arlington National Cemetery as Sergeant First Class Marcus Thompson adjusted his uniform one final time. The crisp November air carried the weight of history, and Marcus felt it settle on his shoulders like an invisible cloak. For 3 years, he had walked the sacred ground as one of the elite tomb guards, protecting the remains of the unknown soldier with unwavering dedication. Today marked his final shift before a well-deserved 2-week leave to visit his family in California. Marcus had always been different from other soldiers. Standing 6 feet 4 inches tall with shoulders that seemed to carry the burden of every fallen hero, he commanded respect wherever he went. His steel-gray eyes held stories of countless midnight vigils and ceremonies that had moved grown men to tears. The precision of his movements had been honed through thousands of hours of practice, each step measured to perfection, each turn executed with military precision that bordered on art. The tomb of the unknown soldier represented something sacred to Marcus. It wasn't just a monument or a tourist attraction. It was a promise kept to every service member who had given their life for their country. The tomb held the remains of unidentified soldiers from World War I, World War II, and the Korean War, representing all those who had died in service but could never return home to their families. Marcus understood the weight of this responsibility better than most. His morning routine began before dawn, as it had for over 1,000 days. The preparation ritual was sacred and methodical. Each button on his uniform was polished to mirror brightness. His shoes gleamed like black glass, reflecting the dedication that went into every detail. The ceremonial rifle was cleaned and inspected with care that bordered on reverence. Marcus knew that millions of visitors would watch him today, but, more importantly, he knew that the unknown soldiers beneath his feet deserved nothing less than perfection. The changing of the guard ceremony was scheduled for 11:30, and Marcus wanted everything to be flawless for his final performance. He had requested this particular shift because it coincided with Veterans Day week, when the cemetery would be filled with families honoring their lost loved ones. The significance wasn't lost on him that his last day would be spent serving during one of the most meaningful times of the year. As he walked through the preparation area, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, he had always felt called to serve something greater than himself. His grandfather had fought in Vietnam, returning home with stories that spoke of brotherhood, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds formed in the crucible of war. Those stories had planted seeds in young Marcus's mind that eventually grew into an unwavering commitment to honor those who had served. The selection process to become a tomb guard had been grueling. Out of hundreds of applicants, only a handful were chosen each year. The physical requirements were demanding, but the mental and emotional commitment required was even more challenging. Guards had to memorize extensive historical information about Arlington Cemetery, military history, and the significance of the unknown soldier. They underwent rigorous training in ceremonial drill movements, learning to march with a precision that would make the most experienced drill sergeant proud. Marcus remembered his first day on duty, how nervous he had felt despite months of preparation. The weight of the rifle in his hands, the eyes of visitors watching his every move, the knowledge that he was now part of an elite brotherhood that had been maintaining this vigil for decades. Veteran guards had told him that the nervousness would fade, but the sense of honor and responsibility would only grow stronger. They had been right. Over the years, Marcus had witnessed moments that would stay with him forever. He had seen elderly veterans break down in tears at the sight of the tomb, overcome by memories of friends who never made it home. He had watched children ask their parents difficult questions about war and death, leading to conversations that helped shape young minds about the cost of freedom. He had been present during special ceremonies where families finally received closure about loved ones who had been missing for decades. One particular memory stood out among the rest. A young widow had approached the tomb with her 2 small children, carrying a folded flag that had been presented to her at her husband's funeral. She knelt by the barrier and whispered something that Marcus couldn't hear, but he could see her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Her children, too young to fully understand the gravity of the moment, stood solemnly beside their mother. In that instant, Marcus understood that his role wasn't just ceremonial, he was a guardian of memory, a keeper of promises made to families who had given everything for their country. The training never truly ended for a tomb guard. Even experienced guards continued to practice their movements, refine their knowledge, and maintain the impossibly high standards that the position demanded. Marcus had spent countless hours studying military history, learning about battles and campaigns that had shaped the nation. He could recite facts about Arlington Cemetery that would impress historians, and he knew the names and stories of many of the soldiers buried in the hallowed ground around him. The uniform itself was a work of art. Every element had meaning, from the specific angle of the hat to the precise placement of medals and ribbons. The shoes were specially designed for the ceremony, with metal cleats that created the distinctive sound of the guard's footsteps on the stone plaza. The rifle, while ceremonial, was a fully functional M14 that was treated with the respect due to any weapon of war. Marcus had learned to handle it with the fluidity of a dancer and the precision of a surgeon. Weather was never a factor in the ceremony. Guards maintained their vigil through blazing heat, bitter cold, driving rain, and heavy snow. Marcus had walked his post during hurricane-force winds and through ice storms that made every step treacherous. The commitment was absolute. The unknown soldier would never be left unguarded, regardless of conditions. This dedication had earned the respect of military personnel worldwide and had become a symbol of American commitment to honoring its fallen heroes. As his shift approached, Marcus felt a mixture of pride and melancholy. He was proud of his service and the role he had played in maintaining this sacred tradition. At the same time, he felt a deep sadness at leaving behind something that had defined his identity for 3 years. Being a tomb guard wasn't just a job, it was a calling, a way of life that shaped every aspect of his existence. His replacement, Corporal Jennifer Martinez, was already preparing for her turn. Marcus had been mentoring her for weeks, sharing the subtle details that could only be learned through experience. She was talented and dedicated, with the same fire in her eyes that Marcus had possessed when he first arrived. He knew the tradition would continue in capable hands, but letting go was still difficult. The cemetery began to fill with visitors as morning turned to afternoon. Families gathered near the tomb, some carrying flowers, others simply standing in respectful silence. Marcus could see veterans in the crowd, their bearing unmistakable even in civilian clothes. School groups arrived with teachers who would try to explain the significance of what they were witnessing. Tour guides spoke in hushed tones about the history and traditions surrounding the tomb. Marcus made his way to the guard quarters for final preparations. The room was Spartan but filled with history. Photographs of past guards lined the walls, creating a visual timeline of the men and women who had served in this capacity over the decades. Citations and commendations spoke of the excellence that was expected and consistently delivered. A logbook contained entries from guards describing significant events, unusual weather conditions, and personal reflections on their service. The weight of tradition pressed down on Marcus as he completed his preparations. He was about to join the ranks of former guards whose dedication had maintained this vigil for generations. His service would become part of the permanent record, his name added to the roster of those who had committed themselves to this sacred duty. The responsibility was both humbling and inspiring. As 11 o'clock approached, Marcus felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that preceded every ceremony. Despite having performed this ritual hundreds of times, he still felt the same mixture of excitement and nervous energy. The precision required left no room for error, and the significance of the moment never diminished. Each ceremony was unique, attended by different people carrying their own stories and connections to military service. Marcus checked his uniform one final time, ensuring that every detail met the exacting standards of the tomb guard. His movements were automatic, the result of years of practice and discipline. The rifle felt familiar in his hands, its weight and balance as comfortable as an extension of his own body. He was ready to perform his duty one last time, to honor the unknown soldiers and the families who would never know where their loved ones rested. The moment had arrived for Marcus to step onto the plaza and begin the ceremony that would mark the end of his service as a tomb guard. Little did he know that this day, which he had planned as a fitting conclusion to his military career, would become the beginning of an adventure that would test everything he believed about duty, honor, and the bonds that connected him to his fellow service members. The events that would unfold over the next few hours would change his perspective on service and remind him that sometimes the most important missions came when they were least expected. As he walked toward the tomb for his final ceremony, Marcus carried with him the hopes and dreams of every family member who had ever wondered about the fate of their missing loved one. He was about to discover that his true test as a guardian would not take place on the sacred grounds of Arlington, but in the bustling corridors of an airport, where his commitment to his brothers and sisters in arms would be challenged in ways he never could have imagined. The ceremony had been flawless. Marcus executed every movement with the precision that had become second nature to him, his final performance as a tomb guard worthy of the 3 years of dedication he had given to the sacred duty. As the crowd dispersed and the changing of the guard concluded, Marcus felt a profound sense of completion. His service at Arlington was finished, and he was ready to begin the next chapter of his life. 2 hours later, Marcus found himself navigating the busy corridors of Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport, dressed in his civilian clothes but carrying himself with the unmistakable bearing of a career soldier. His flight to Los Angeles was scheduled to depart at 6:45 in the evening, giving him plenty of time to grab dinner and reflect on his years of service. The airport bustled with the usual mix of business travelers, families on vacation, and military personnel in various uniforms making their way to assignments around the world. Marcus had always found airports to be fascinating places where countless individual stories intersected for brief moments before diverging again into separate paths. Today, however, he was focused on his own journey. His parents were waiting for him in California, along with his sister Sarah and her 2 young children whom he hadn't seen in over a year. The prospect of 2 weeks away from the rigid structure of military life felt both exciting and slightly unsettling. As he made his way through the security checkpoint, Marcus noticed the respectful nods from TSA agents who recognized the quiet confidence that marked experienced military personnel. His carry-on bag contained the few personal items he had accumulated during his time at Arlington, including a photo album filled with images from ceremonies and special events. These memories would have to sustain him as he transitioned to whatever came next in his military career. The boarding area for his flight was crowded, typical for a Friday evening departure. Marcus found an empty seat near the windows overlooking the tarmac and settled in to wait. He pulled out his phone to text his family about his on-time departure when he noticed a commotion near the gate counter. A young woman in military dress uniform was speaking animatedly with airline staff, her voice rising with frustration. Marcus couldn't help but notice the woman's uniform. She wore the dress blue uniform of the United States Army, with ribbons and badges that indicated significant service and achievement. Her posture and bearing suggested she was an experienced soldier, but there was something about her demeanor that seemed desperate, almost frantic. The airline employees appeared to be explaining something to her that she clearly didn't want to hear. Military personnel often faced challenges with airline travel, particularly when flying on orders or dealing with last-minute changes to assignments. Marcus had experienced his share of delayed flights, cancelled connections, and booking complications that seemed to plague military travelers. He decided to mind his own business unless the situation escalated to the point where his intervention might be helpful. The young woman stepped away from the counter, her shoulders sagging with defeat. She walked to a nearby seating area and sat down heavily, pulling out her phone with hands that trembled slightly. Marcus could see tears forming in her eyes as she dialed a number and waited for someone to answer. Her conversation was brief and emotional, filled with apologies and explanations that he couldn't quite hear from his position across the boarding area. After ending her call, the woman sat staring at her phone screen, apparently trying to decide what to do next. Marcus noticed that several other passengers were watching her with mixture of curiosity and sympathy. Military personnel in distress at airports often drew attention, particularly when they were clearly dealing with something more serious than a simple travel inconvenience. Marcus made a decision that would alter the course of his evening. He approached the young woman, introducing himself with the casual familiarity that existed between service members. Her name was Staff Sergeant Lisa Chen, and she was attempting to reach Dover Air Force Base in Delaware for a mission that required her presence by tomorrow morning. The airline had just informed her that her connecting flight had been cancelled due to mechanical problems, and there were no available seats on alternative flights until Sunday. Lisa explained her situation with the kind of urgency that Marcus recognized from his own military experience. She was part of a team responsible for the dignified transfer of fallen service members, specifically trained in the protocols and procedures that ensured America's war dead received the honor and respect they deserved. A plane carrying the remains of 3 soldiers killed in overseas operations was scheduled to arrive at Dover the following morning, and Lisa's presence was required for the solemn ceremony that would mark their return to American soil. The significance of Lisa's mission resonated deeply with Marcus. Having spent 3 years guarding the tomb of unknown soldiers, he understood better than most the sacred nature of her work. The families of these fallen heroes would be waiting at Dover, preparing to receive their loved ones for the final journey home. The ceremony required precise coordination and the presence of trained personnel who could ensure that every detail was handled with appropriate dignity and respect. Lisa had already exhausted every official channel for resolving her travel situation. She had contacted her command, spoken with the airline's military assistance desk, and even attempted to arrange ground transportation that would get her to Dover in time. The drive would take over 4 hours in good conditions, and she didn't have access to a vehicle. Commercial bus and train services wouldn't get her there until well after the ceremony was scheduled to begin. Marcus listened to Lisa's explanation with growing concern. The mission she described was exactly the kind of assignment that military personnel couldn't simply skip or postpone. Families who had already endured the unimaginable loss of their loved ones were depending on military professionals to handle the return with perfect execution. Any failure in the process would add unnecessary pain to an already devastating situation. The airline staff had been polite but firm in their explanation that nothing could be done to resolve the situation. The mechanical problems with Lisa's original connecting flight were serious enough to ground the aircraft indefinitely. Alternative flights were completely booked due to the holiday travel season, and even the standby lists were filled with passengers who had been waiting for days. The customer service representative had suggested that Lisa contact her military chain of command to explain the situation and request a delay in her assignment. Marcus knew that delaying such a mission was virtually impossible. The dignified transfer ceremonies operated on strict schedules that were coordinated with multiple agencies and organizations. Families made travel arrangements to be present, honor guards prepared for the solemn rituals, and media coverage was often arranged to document the return of fallen heroes. Changing these schedules would require extraordinary circumstances and would likely cause significant problems for everyone involved. As they talked, Marcus began to formulate a plan. He had extensive contacts throughout the military community, developed during his years of service and, particularly during his time at Arlington. The tomb guards worked closely with personnel from all branches of the military, and Marcus had built relationships with officers and enlisted personnel who might be able to help in a situation like this. He pulled out his phone and began scrolling through his contacts, looking for someone who might have the authority or resources to assist Lisa. His first call was to Master Sergeant Rodriguez, a veteran logistics specialist who had worked at Arlington for over 15 years. Rodriguez had a reputation for being able to solve impossible problems through a combination of military connections, creative thinking, and sheer determination. Marcus explained the situation and asked if Rodriguez knew of any options that might not be immediately obvious to a stranded traveler. Rodriguez listened carefully to the details and promised to make some calls. He had contacts at Dover Air Force Base who might be able to provide insight into alternative transportation options or potentially adjust the timing of the ceremony if absolutely necessary. He also knew personnel at nearby military installations who might have aircraft or vehicles available for emergency transportation. While they waited for Rodriguez to call back, Marcus and Lisa continued discussing possible solutions. Marcus offered to drive her to Dover if they could arrange a rental car, though the timing would be extremely tight. Lisa was grateful for the offer but worried that they might not arrive in time even if they left immediately. Traffic between Washington and Delaware could be unpredictable, particularly on Friday evening during holiday travel season. The boarding announcement for Marcus's flight to Los Angeles interrupted their planning. Passengers in first class and those needing special assistance were invited to begin boarding. Marcus looked at his boarding pass and, then, at Lisa, who was still desperately trying to find a solution to her transportation crisis. The weight of decision settled on his shoulders as he realized that his comfortable leave time was about to be sacrificed for a fellow service member in need. Marcus made a choice that reflected the values that had guided his 3 years as a tomb guard. He walked to the gate counter and asked the airline representative if he could change his ticket to a later flight, explaining that he needed to assist a fellow service member with an urgent military mission. The representative was sympathetic but explained that changing his ticket would likely result in a significant delay in his travel to California, possibly extending his trip by several days during the busy holiday season. The financial implications were also significant. Changing his ticket would result in additional fees, and there was no guarantee that he would be able to reach California in time to spend meaningful time with his family. Marcus had been looking forward to this leave for months, and his family had made special plans to celebrate his visit. Canceling or significantly delaying his arrival would disappoint everyone who had been counting on his presence. Despite these considerations, Marcus knew that he couldn't board his flight while leaving Lisa stranded without assistance. The mission she described was exactly the kind of responsibility that demanded sacrifice from military personnel. The families waiting at Dover deserved to have their loved ones returned with full honor and dignity, and Lisa's presence was essential to ensuring that happened. Marcus canceled his flight and committed to helping Lisa reach Dover Air Force Base by whatever means necessary. His decision sparked a chain of events that would test his problem-solving abilities, challenge his commitment to fellow service members, and ultimately remind him why he had chosen to dedicate his life to military service. The comfortable leave he had planned would have to wait while he ensured that 3 fallen heroes received the homecoming they had earned through their ultimate sacrifice. Lisa was overwhelmed by Marcus's decision to sacrifice his own travel plans to assist her. She tried to convince him that his help wasn't necessary, that she would find another way to resolve the situation. Marcus quietly but firmly explained that leaving her behind wasn't an option, that his commitment to fellow service members didn't end when his shift at the tomb concluded. His decision reflected the core values that had made him an exceptional tomb guard and would define him throughout his military career. As they worked together to find a solution, Marcus realized that this unexpected mission might be exactly what he needed. The transition from his highly structured role at Arlington to whatever came next in his military career had been weighing on his mind for weeks. Perhaps helping Lisa reach Dover would provide the sense of purpose and connection to service that he was seeking as he moved forward into an uncertain future. Master Sergeant Rodriguez called back within 30 minutes with information that would change the trajectory of their evening. He had contacted his network of military personnel throughout the region and discovered that a small military transport flight was scheduled to depart from Joint Base Andrews at 10:30 that evening, bound for Dover Air Force Base. The flight was carrying medical supplies and would have space for additional passengers if they could get proper authorization. The challenge was obtaining permission to board the flight and physically reaching Andrews Air Force Base in time for departure. Rodriguez explained that the authorization would need to come from someone with significant rank and influence, preferably someone who understood the critical nature of Lisa's mission. He had already begun reaching out to contacts who might be able to expedite the approval process. Marcus and Lisa made their way to a quieter area of the airport where they could make phone calls without the constant background noise of announcements and conversations. Lisa called her commanding officer at Dover to explain the situation and request assistance with transportation. Meanwhile, Marcus continued working his network of contacts, looking for someone who might have the authority to approve their travel on the military flight. The conversation with Lisa's commanding officer was encouraging. Colonel Patricia Williams had been expecting Lisa's arrival and understood the importance of her presence at tomorrow's ceremony. The families of the fallen soldiers had specifically requested that the dignified transfer be conducted with full military honors, and Lisa was one of only a handful of personnel qualified to coordinate the complex logistics involved. Colonel Williams promised to make calls to Andrews Air Force Base to request approval for Lisa's transportation. While they waited for official approval, Marcus contacted Captain Jennifer Hayes, a logistics officer he had worked with during special ceremonies at Arlington. Captain Hayes had connections throughout the Washington military community and was known for her ability to cut through red tape when military missions were at stake. She listened to Marcus's explanation of the situation and immediately understood the urgency involved. Captain Hayes explained that getting approval for civilian travel on military aircraft required extensive documentation and security clearances that could take days to process under normal circumstances. However, she knew that emergency provisions existed for situations involving critical military missions. She would need to contact senior officers who had the authority to expedite the approval process and authorize travel for personnel not originally manifested on the flight. The clock was ticking as they worked to arrange transportation to Andrews Air Force Base. Even if they received approval for the military flight, they would need to travel approximately 25 miles from Reagan National Airport to Andrews in Friday evening traffic. Lisa had already researched commercial transportation options and discovered that taxi fare would cost several $100s, money that neither she nor Marcus had readily available. Marcus remembered that Sergeant First Class David Park, a fellow Tomb Guard, lived in the Virginia suburbs and might be willing to provide transportation to Andrews. Park had recently completed his own rotation at the Tomb and was known for his willingness to help fellow service members. Marcus called Park and explained the situation, asking if he would be willing to drive them to the base. Park didn't hesitate to offer his assistance. He was familiar with the dignified transfer ceremonies from his time at Arlington and understood the significance of Lisa's mission. He could pick them up at the airport within 45 minutes and would have them at Andrews well before the 10:30 departure time. His offers solved their immediate transportation problem and demonstrated the kind of mutual support that characterized relationships between military personnel. As they waited for Park to arrive, Marcus and Lisa continued working on obtaining official approval for their travel. Colonel Williams had been in contact with the operations officer at Andrews and had provided detailed information about Lisa's mission and the critical nature of her presence at Dover. The operations officer was sympathetic to the situation but explained that authorization for additional passengers would need to come from the base commander or someone with equivalent authority. The approval process was complicated by the fact that Marcus was not directly involved in the Dover mission. His presence on the flight would need to be justified separately, either as essential support for Lisa's mission or under some other provision that allowed for his transportation. Lisa argued that Marcus's experience with military ceremonies and his knowledge of protocols made him valuable support for her mission, though they both knew this was a stretch of the actual requirements. Captain Hayes called back with promising news. She had reached Colonel Michael Thompson, the deputy base commander at Andrews, and had explained the situation in detail. Colonel Thompson was a veteran of multiple deployments and understood the importance of the dignified transfer ceremonies. He was willing to authorize emergency transportation for both Lisa and Marcus, provided they could reach the base in time for departure and complete the necessary security procedures. The authorization came with specific conditions. Both Marcus and Lisa would need to present military identification and undergo security screening upon arrival at Andrews. They would be traveling as space-available passengers, meaning their seats could be reassigned if operational requirements changed. Most importantly, they would need to sign waivers acknowledging that they were traveling on a military aircraft for official purposes and accepting responsibility for any delays or complications that might arise. Park arrived at the airport exactly when he had promised, driving a well-maintained pickup truck that could easily accommodate 3 passengers and their luggage. He greeted Marcus with the casual familiarity of fellow Tomb Guards and welcomed Lisa with the professional courtesy extended to all service members. As they loaded their bags and prepared to leave for Andrews, Park explained that he had already mapped the optimal route and anticipated arriving at the base with time to spare. The drive to Andrews provided an opportunity for Marcus and Lisa to discuss the mission that awaited them at Dover. Lisa explained that the 3 fallen soldiers being returned were members of an explosive ordnance disposal unit who had been killed while attempting to disarm an improvised explosive device that threatened a village school in Afghanistan. Their actions had saved the lives of dozens of children and teachers, making their sacrifice particularly meaningful to the military community and their families. The eldest of the 3 soldiers was Staff Sergeant Michael Rodriguez, a 32-year-old father of 2 young children who had been scheduled to return home from his deployment in just 6 weeks. His wife Carmen had been planning a welcome home celebration that would now become a memorial service. The couple had been married for 8 years and had been looking forward to Michael's transition to a stateside assignment that would allow him to spend more time with their family. The second soldier was Specialist Jennifer Watson, a 24-year-old explosives expert who had volunteered for the dangerous mission despite having the option to remain at a safer distance. She had been engaged to marry her longtime boyfriend when she returned from deployment, and the wedding had been planned for the following spring. Her parents had already begun preparations for the ceremony, never imagining they would instead be planning a funeral. The youngest of the three was Private First Class David Kim, just 20 years old and serving his first overseas deployment. David had been studying engineering before joining the military and had planned to use his GI Bill benefits to complete his degree when his service ended. His parents had immigrated to the United States from South Korea and viewed his military service as the ultimate expression of gratitude to their adopted country. Lisa's voice carried deep emotion as she described the families who would be waiting at Dover. Each family had been assigned a casualty assistance officer who had been working with them since notification of their loved one's death. These officers had been coordinating with the mortuary affairs team to ensure that every detail of the dignified transfer met the family's wishes while maintaining the military standards that honored the soldiers' sacrifice. The ceremony itself was a precisely choreographed event that represented the culmination of extensive logistical coordination. Military personnel from multiple units would participate in carrying the flag-draped transfer cases from the aircraft to waiting vehicles. Honor guards would render appropriate salutes and maintain positions of respect throughout the process. Military chaplains would be available to provide spiritual support to family members who requested it. Media coverage of the event would be carefully managed to respect the privacy of grieving families while documenting the military's commitment to honoring its fallen heroes. Photographers and reporters who had been granted access would follow strict guidelines about what could be filmed and how the coverage would be presented to the public. The goal was to show the dignity and respect accorded to America's war dead without exploiting the private grief of their families. As they approached Andrews Air Force Base, Marcus felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that preceded important military missions. Despite not being officially assigned to the Dover ceremony, he understood that his presence might be crucial to ensuring that everything proceeded smoothly. His experience with military protocols and his understanding of the significance of such ceremonies could prove valuable if unexpected challenges arose. The security checkpoint at Andrews was more extensive than either Marcus or Lisa had anticipated. Their names were not on the original manifest for the transport flight, requiring additional verification of their authorization to board. Security personnel needed to contact the Base Operations Center to confirm that Colonel Thompson had indeed approved their travel and that all necessary documentation was in order. The process took longer than expected, with multiple phone calls and verification procedures that consumed precious time. Marcus and Lisa waited anxiously as security personnel worked to confirm their authorization, knowing that the flight would depart on schedule regardless of whether they had completed the boarding process. Military transport flights operated on strict schedules that couldn't be adjusted for individual passengers, even those traveling on urgent missions. Finally, their authorization was confirmed, and they were cleared to proceed to the aircraft. The transport plane was a smaller aircraft than either had expected, configured primarily for cargo transport with limited passenger seating. The crew briefed them on safety procedures and explained that the flight to Dover would take approximately 45 minutes, arriving well before midnight. As the aircraft taxied toward the runway, Marcus reflected on the unexpected turn his evening had taken. Just a few hours earlier, he had been preparing to board a commercial flight to California for a relaxing vacation with his family. Now he was accompanying a fellow service member on an emergency mission that would ensure 3 fallen heroes received the honor they deserved. The change in plans perfectly illustrated the unpredictable nature of military service and the commitment that extended beyond official duty hours. The flight to Dover passed quickly, with Marcus and Lisa using the time to review the procedures and protocols that would guide tomorrow's ceremony. Lisa shared copies of the detailed timeline that had been prepared for the event, highlighting the precise coordination required between multiple military units, civilian agencies, and family support personnel. Marcus was impressed by the complexity of the planning and the attention to detail that ensured every aspect of the ceremony would honor the fallen soldiers appropriately. As they prepared for landing at Dover, both Marcus and Lisa understood that their real work was just beginning. The next 12 hours would test their ability to execute a mission that meant everything to 3 grieving families and represented the military's sacred commitment to never leaving a fallen comrade behind. The urgency that had driven their journey from Washington was now focused on ensuring that every detail of tomorrow's ceremony lived up to the sacrifice made by Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, Specialist Watson, and Private First Class Kim. Dover Air Force Base appeared through the aircraft windows like a constellation of lights against the Delaware night sky. The base served as America's primary gateway for fallen service members returning from overseas, a role that carried profound significance for everyone who worked there. As their transport aircraft touched down on the runway, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders once again, though this time in a very different context than his duties at Arlington. Colonel Williams was waiting for them at the base operations building, along with Major Sarah Davidson, the officer in charge of mortuary affairs operations. Both women greeted Lisa with evident relief and extended professional courtesy to Marcus, acknowledging his role in ensuring Lisa's arrival at this critical moment. Colonel Williams explained that the aircraft carrying the 3 fallen soldiers would arrive at 6:30 in the morning, giving them just enough time to complete final preparations for the dignified transfer ceremony. The briefing that followed was comprehensive and sobering. Major Davidson walked them through every detail of the morning's events, from the precise positioning of honor guard units to the timing of family notifications about the aircraft's arrival. Each element had been carefully planned to ensure that the ceremony honored both military traditions and the specific wishes expressed by the families of the fallen soldiers. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's family had requested that his young children be present for the transfer, despite the emotional difficulty this would entail. His wife Carmen had made this decision after consulting with military chaplains and family counselors, believing that witnessing their father's return would provide important closure for the children. Special arrangements had been made to ensure they would be supported throughout the ceremony and could leave immediately if they became too distressed. Specialist Watson's parents had asked that the ceremony include specific military honors that reflected their daughter's achievements and the courage she had shown during her final mission. Jennifer had been posthumously awarded the Bronze Star with Valor for her actions in saving the Afghan school, and her parents wanted this recognition to be part of the transfer ceremony. Military personnel had been working to incorporate these honors in a way that maintained the solemn dignity of the event. Private First Class Kim's family presented unique challenges because of cultural considerations that needed to be respected alongside military protocols. His parents had requested that certain Korean traditions be acknowledged during the ceremony, requiring coordination with Korean American community leaders and military chaplains familiar with cross-cultural burial customs. The goal was to honor both David's American military service and his family's cultural heritage. Marcus found himself assigned to coordinate with the honor guard units that would participate in the ceremony. His experience at Arlington made him particularly qualified for this role, as he understood the precise movements and timing required for such events. The honor guards had been practicing for days, but Marcus's expertise would ensure that every detail met the exacting standards that such ceremonies demanded. The mortuary affairs team worked through the night to prepare the transfer cases and coordinate with aircraft crew members who would assist in moving the remains from the transport plane to the waiting vehicles. Each transfer case had been draped with an American flag that had been carefully inspected and prepared according to strict military specifications. The flags themselves carried special significance, as they would later be presented to the families as symbols of their loved ones' service and sacrifice. As dawn approached, family members began arriving at Dover for the ceremony. Marcus watched from a respectful distance as relatives gathered in the family support area, their grief evident despite their efforts to maintain composure during this difficult moment. Casualty assistance officers stayed close to each family group, providing support and ensuring that they understood what would happen during the transfer ceremony. Carmen Rodriguez arrived with her 2 children, 7-year-old Michael Jr. and 5-year-old Sophia, both dressed in their best clothes and carrying small American flags. The children seemed confused about the significance of the early morning gathering, but they stayed close to their mother and followed her instructions about remaining quiet and respectful. Carmen wore a military wife's pin on her dress, a symbol of her connection to the service community that had now become a brotherhood of support during her darkest hour. Jennifer Watson's parents, Robert and Mary Watson, arrived wearing clothing that reflected their daughter's military pride. Robert, himself a Vietnam veteran, wore a dress uniform with ribbons that spoke of his own service decades earlier. Mary carried a photograph of Jennifer in her dress uniform, taken during her graduation from Explosive Ordnance Disposal School. The pride and grief visible on their faces captured the complex emotions that define such moments for military families. David Kim's parents, accompanied by his younger sister and several members of their extended family, represented the diversity that characterized America's military. His father wore a black suit with a small American flag pin, while his mother carried prayer beads that reflected their family's Buddhist traditions. David's sister held a folded letter that she planned to place with her brother's remains, a final message that she had been unable to send before his death. The aircraft carrying the fallen soldiers appeared as a small dot on the horizon precisely at 6:30, its approach coordinated with air traffic controllers who had cleared the airspace for this solemn mission. As the plane grew larger, Marcus felt the familiar tightening in his chest that accompanied moments of profound significance. This aircraft carried 3 young Americans who had given their lives in service to their country, and the next hour would determine whether their return home honored their sacrifice appropriately. Major Davidson coordinated the positioning of honor guard units as the aircraft taxied toward the designated area. Military personnel formed precise formations that had been practiced extensively, each individual understanding their role in the ceremony that would unfold. Marcus took his position with the coordination team, ready to assist with any adjustments that might be needed as the transfer proceeded. The aircraft door opened, and the transfer team began the careful process of removing the flag-draped cases containing the remains of the 3 soldiers. Each case was handled with reverence that reflected the military's commitment to treating fallen comrades with ultimate respect. Honor Guard members moved with precision that bordered on perfection, their movements choreographed to ensure that every detail reflected the dignity deserved by America's war dead. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was the first to be transferred, his case carried by fellow explosive ordnance disposal specialists who had volunteered for this duty. As the Honor Guard moved his remains toward the waiting vehicle, Carmen Rodriguez placed her hand over her heart and whispered something that only she and her children could hear. Michael Jr. and Sophia stood silently beside their mother, their young faces showing confusion and sadness that they were still too young to fully understand. Specialist Watson's transfer followed immediately, with her case carried by members of her own unit who had flown back from Afghanistan specifically to participate in this ceremony. Her parents watched with expressions that combined pride and heartbreak, seeing their daughter return home in circumstances they had never allowed themselves to imagine. The military precision of the transfer provided comfort in its dignity while emphasizing the finality of their loss. Private First Class Kim's transfer completed the ceremony, his case handled with special care that reflected both military protocol and sensitivity to his family's cultural background. A Korean-American chaplain offered a brief blessing that incorporated elements of both Christian and Buddhist traditions, creating a moment that honored David's heritage while acknowledging his American military service. His parents bowed deeply as his remains were loaded into the waiting vehicle, their gesture expressing gratitude and grief in equal measure. Marcus felt tears forming in his eyes as he watched the 3 families saying goodbye to their loved ones one final time before the vehicles departed for the mortuary affairs facility. The ceremony had achieved its intended purpose of returning fallen heroes with honor and dignity, but the human cost was evident in every family member's face. These weren't just military casualties or statistical entries in casualty reports, they were sons, daughters, husbands, and fathers whose absence would leave permanent holes in the lives of those who loved them. The debriefing that followed the ceremony was brief but emotional. Colonel Williams thanked everyone who had participated in ensuring that the transfer proceeded without problems, acknowledging that the success of such ceremonies required coordination and dedication from dozens of military personnel. She specifically recognized Marcus's last-minute contribution, noting that his experience and expertise had been valuable in ensuring that every detail met appropriate standards. Lisa approached Marcus as the debriefing concluded, her expression reflecting gratitude that went beyond simple thanks for transportation assistance. She explained that his presence had provided confidence and support that allowed her to focus on her primary responsibilities without worrying about logistics and coordination details. His knowledge of military ceremonies and his calm professionalism had been exactly what she needed during one of the most important missions of her career. As they prepared to leave Dover Air Force Base, Marcus reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought him to this moment. 24 hours earlier, he had been preparing for vacation leave after completing his final shift as a tomb guard. Instead, he had spent the night ensuring that 3 fallen soldiers received the honor they deserved, participating in a mission that reminded him why military service was more than just a job or career choice. The drive back to Washington gave Marcus time to process the events of the past day and their significance for his future military service. His willingness to sacrifice personal plans to assist a fellow service member had led to an experience that reaffirmed his commitment to the values that had guided his time at Arlington. The ceremony at Dover had demonstrated that his dedication to honoring fallen heroes didn't end when he left the tomb. It was a commitment that would define his approach to military service throughout his career. Colonel Williams had offered Marcus a position with the mortuary affairs team at Dover, recognizing that his experience and dedication would be valuable assets for future ceremonies. The offer provided an opportunity to continue serving in a role that directly honored America's war dead while developing new skills and responsibilities. Marcus was considering the opportunity as he prepared to continue his leave and visit his family in California. The airport seemed different when they returned to Washington, transformed by Marcus's perspective on service and sacrifice. The busy corridors filled with travelers pursuing their individual journeys now reminded him of the interconnected nature of American society and the military personnel who served to protect the freedoms that allowed such routine activities to continue uninterrupted. Marcus's flight to Los Angeles was rescheduled for later that afternoon, giving him time to rest and reflect on the experiences of the past day. As he waited to board the aircraft that would finally take him to his family, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction about his decision to assist Lisa and participate in the Dover ceremony. His vacation had been delayed, but he had been reminded of the purpose and meaning that drew him to military service in the first place. The events at Dover had provided Marcus with clarity about his future military career and his commitment to serving fellow service members and honoring those who had made the ultimate sacrifice. His time as a tomb guard was complete, but his dedication to the values and principles that defined that role would continue to guide his service for years to come. The unexpected mission had become a bridge between his past service and whatever challenges and opportunities awaited him in the future. As his aircraft departed for California, Marcus carried with him the memory of 3 families receiving their loved ones with dignity and honor. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, Specialist Watson, and Private First Class Kim had returned home to the grateful nation they had served, their sacrifice acknowledged through ceremonies that reflected America's commitment to never forgetting those who gave their lives in service to others. Marcus's role in ensuring that homecoming had been worthy of their sacrifice would remain one of the most meaningful experiences of his military career.